Okay, everyone, welcome back to the Information Revolution, a podcast that's been away for a little minute, but is here for you if you're interested in information. My name's Michael Upton, and I'm an information management consultant based in Wellington, New Zealand.
Hello again, I'm Judi Vernau and I'm an information architect based in Wellington, New Zealand.
And I'm Karl Melrose. I'm an information management consultant based out of Adelaide in South Australia. Michael, governance.
Governance, yeah. So, the idea for this session was to have a bit of a chat about something that's kind of a word du jour, information governance, way cooler than information management or records management, or probably information architecture. So what is governance, really? That's where we wanted to start and just sort of explore the concept.
Yeah, I just keep hearing the word, well, we have done for a while, but certainly these days, keep hearing that word governance. But I wonder how many people really stop and think what it means or what they want it to mean.
Yeah,
I mean,
is
for
it
me,
a word that we used to describe, the same things that we used to do, and now we're going to put another label on them so that
yeah,
people will
yeah.
take the things that they don't take seriously at the moment more seriously because we use a different word because we've included governance in the title. That's a very cynical way to start.
No, but I think you put your finger on something there. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that, but a way to help people take it more seriously. I think
Yeah.
that's actually that's that's got something in it.
Mm,
So
Yeah, and I
yeah,
would also add to that it certainly made me smile. I had a strong reaction. I'm often deep in the land of Microsoft 365, and they talk about information governance as a thing you can get from Microsoft Purview. So, and that I don't know, that I can't see what software would deliver information governance in, as I understand it, or, how I think about it. And so for me, um, even though, like, I haven't sat down and written down and, gone, okay, this is information governance. I had such a strong reaction that obviously I must have some idea in my mind, some kind of assumptions about what it
mm,
is, because I thought, what?
yeah. Well, 365 is not going to write your policies for you, is it? And that's
No,
surely part of governance. And it's not going to say what are the roles and responsibilities.
yeah,
It's gonna help you do some tasks, but it's not gonna
yeah,
do your governance for you or certainly not set it up.
yeah,
no, and I mean, how do I'm honestly really interested in how you both, and I guess I like to start from a, sort of definitions because
Me too, always.
you're talking about, yeah, well, of course, but for me, information governance is fundamentally about decision rights and how you allocate them. Who gets to make decisions about this type of stuff, and how are they supposed to make decisions about them? It's the delegation schedule for information governance. It's this person owns the information. They delegate ownership rights to these people. Ownership means you can make these decisions or you must make these decisions,
Mm.
and
hmm,
those kinds of things. And how you think about risk, how you think about value. I mean, you put all of those things into an information governance plan for an organization. Interested in how you both think about it.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. Who is responsible for doing this? Who's responsible for approving it? Who's responsible for signing it off? What happens when something goes wrong? What happens then? But I also think it's there's something around the quality markers as well. So what do we think is a quality marker? What are the standards? What's good enough? What are
How
the
to manage
goals?
risk for the
Yeah, what are the success
what
criteria? Yeah, all of that stuff, so that it's clear what these roles, or as clear as you can make it, what these roles and responsibilities are working with in order to carry out their responsibilities. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And,
for
it's kind of
sure.
a level. I mean, I would absolutely think about, those things as who gets to make a decision about the quality of the information and, what is appropriate risk and who makes that decision. How do we
Mm.
delegate all of those things so that people know they have to do them?
Yeah. And I would I'd add something about, I guess, what's the kind of level of the decision being made or something
Hmm.
that to me, an information like that governance to me sounds bigger picture and higher, probably higher stakes decisions, like bigger choices being made, like we can when we talk about roles and responsibilities, and if we talk about classic models like RACI, there's some point where that's operational management, and I would distinguish that from governance. I would say that just kind of who gets to do what on the day to day. I mean, maybe you could whatever you could say, oh well, governance goes from strategic level all the way down, but I think traditionally I would think of governance as being bigger decisions, basically about the
Mm.
direction of things and
Delegating operational
implementations.
responsibility, you know, defining what those things are, making
Mm,
sure that whatever responsibilities you've defined, they're actually being followed through on, and people are actually doing what they need to. I mean, I think we're all talking about the same kind of things.
Yeah, I think so. I think so
what?
too. Um,
That's
and
boring.
there's
No.
the responsibility for approving or not approving changes, and
Yeah.
I mean, at a lower level, those changes are going to be very small. So, I mean, if you're building the departmental glossary or whatever it is, then do I add this term or not? Am I allowed to add this term, or does it need approval? That's kind of
Mm,
a little thing, but in some places they might feel that that needs actually quite a high level of approval at some point. But then you've got those
mm,
much broader questions of who can approve. I don't know really. A change in the whole information architecture, for example.
mm.
What
Yeah.
what is the probably body, but you know who is it? Who's responsible for making those changes? So there's the change management side of it, but then there's the quality management side of it, and those there's two different
Yeah.
aspects I think to the governance.
Yes, I agree. I mean, and around that sort of idea of managing change, I think part of governance for me would be monitoring or assurance
Hmm.
or something about oversight, like that idea that a governance body or a responsible person in a governance model ought to be paying attention to how things are going, like that
Hmm.
that's actually part of governing stuff. Basically,
Absolutely.
this idea
Yeah,
that
definitely.
when we're not saying that information just sort of sits there, and nor do the sort of artifacts or tools that we're trying to develop or work with. Yeah, yeah, governance and oversight go together in my mind.
Mm.
Whereas often when people are talking about a RACI, I think they would often leave out monitoring or assurance activities or
I mean,
responsibilities.
that's
Would
sort of interesting, isn't it? I mean, you think about
Yeah,
it,
was it your
setting
experience?
setting goals and actually making sure they happen. I mean, you think about project governance. It's is the project going to do what it said it would do? Time, cost,
Yeah.
scope. You know, all that kind of stuff. Time, cost, scope, whatever the other elements are. It's
Hmm.
are we actually on track to do what we want? We've defined quality as meaning this for our organization when it comes to information. Is that what we're actually delivering? If we're not, how do we know that that's what that we're not delivering that thing? What do we do when we know? Who gets involved? I mean, all those kinds of things. I think for sure.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, some things are going to be a lot more static than others. Um, but you still need to have that oversight. Like, for example, a metadata scheme. Hopefully, if it's been built well, it won't really need to change, but you still need that oversight, that monitoring, that review, periodic review, maybe twice a year or maybe once, whatever, um, to say, is it still doing what it's supposed to do? Are these things still fit for purpose? To my mind, that's very much still part of governance.
Hmm.
And
And
yeah,
probably a related question of like, is this still the right thing to achieve some
yeah,
agreed outcome or higher
yeah,
thing about our priorities? Like, say, as an organization, we're going to go hard on interoperability next, and we think these are the ways we're doing it, like that's the really high level of governance, I think, is that sort of idea of, um, the direction setting of which tools and artifacts and things we're even talking about,
Mm.
and therefore which kind of pieces of work or priorities are there. Yeah, could you say the strategic and operational governance? Is that
Hmm.
even a worthwhile
Yeah,
split?
I think it
could
is.
be. Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, could be. I mean, I
Yeah.
think it's quite interesting that we're not saying, oh, governance is making sure that the right things get disposed of at the right time.
I mean, that's an element that,
It's an element, isn't it? But
controls around that and making sure that you can actually, understand whether it is happening and those kinds of things. And you can report on it, quantify it in meaningful ways.
And I guess when I was thinking about the strategic thing, it's about that direction setting about whether or not that's the thing you care
yeah,
about.
yeah,
And I'm sure
yeah.
most organizations would care about that, but that's actually a thing that I
I
think
mean,
if you were taking governance seriously, you'd go right to the top and kind of go, well, what are the things we're focusing our efforts on?
Mm.
You could argue this all comes back to just measures of quality. Like what does it mean to deliver on the level of quality we're aiming for? What is the level of quality that we're looking for? And one of those things might be we've disposed of the dross we don't need, on a routine or to a certain level, or we can find the things we need to a certain level of reliability, or we've managed a particular information risk in a certain way. There's certain kinds of direction setting or strategy that I think ought to
Well,
be a part of
exactly.
governance, and which I don't see as day-to-day management. Like I see it as telling the operations level what management means or what things to focus on. Yeah.
That's part of. I mean, when you start talking information governance, I mean, I always come back to just straight governance, which when you think about it
Yeah.
in a corporate
Hmm.
context, is always we've got shareholders generally, or some variant of that, whether it's
Yep.
the people as a shareholder of their government agency, but you've got shareholders and you've got a board of directors or some other responsible group that is responsible for board level governance, as in, is this organization doing the thing that the shareholders or whatever it is, that they want to do? Is it going in a direction that they want it to go in? And are we
Hmm.
delivering results that we say we will deliver? And at some point, that's going to include who gets to set, the direction we go in, as in the goals we focus on, what level of performance do we want to hit, which again, quality, performance and
Mm.
just another
Yeah.
quality aspect. How do we measure that? What do we do if we're not hitting that level of performance? Whose head is on the block, basically, all those kinds of things. I mean, I think they're all wrapped up in governance and ultimately the information side of things. And the fact that we need to emphasize it, I mean, it's probably just a recognition that I think for a long time it was sort of just assumed that the information was part of what went on. It was just your business process needs some information here, and so you as a person running a process, it is your responsibility to make sure that your information supports the level of quality delivery that you're aiming for. But I think
Mm.
as we've got beyond that, and I think particularly as, I mean, I guess if you think about the timing, you start to think about things like GDPR and those kinds of things where there's been real liability associated with the loss of information and the poor control of information. I think that's where you started to really see information governance bubbling up as well. And I think inside, sort of data practices as well. And I guess they're calling it data governance, but I can't tell the difference. It's really about, well, we have this business unit here and we've got this business unit 14 down that also uses that piece of data to make high leverage decisions. And so part of data governance is having a framework in place that says, this is how we make decisions about quality here, so that this person is generating data up here that is of a quality level that will deliver the results down here. And, we understand lineage and we understand all that, provenance in an informational
Yeah.
records
Yeah.
program, so that, we know we're delivering the things we're supposed to. I think those are probably, I mean, do you think that's something that's, what do you think the timeline is for thinking about information governance as something discrete from or different from records management, information management,
I think
content, whatever?
that expression, that term, data governance, is the thing that's really made it come to the fore a lot more in the last year or two, maybe more, but I've noticed it in the last year or two, because of the emphasis on good reporting, on getting your data clean and tidy, and how
Right.
crucial that is. And so you can see jobs advertised for people working in data governance, which you wouldn't have
Mm,
seen
mm.
before, I think, or not, or I would not have noticed anyway. But
Mm,
so I think there's a lot more um, emphasis and thought around that. But more broadly, information governance, not so much. I think that's my
Yeah,
impression.
I
I,
I reckon I don't see jobs that talk about information governance as, I mean, just thinking about it. I mean, maybe I just can't think of anything offhand. I think I've certainly seen, it's probably even 10 years ago, people being cynical about whether it's a rebranding exercise that, and in particular, I remember someone trying to distinguish information governance as being where you think about information wherever it is rather than just in your EDRMS,
All right,
probably 10 years ago.
right.
And to me, I mean, that just made me smile because, yeah, that's always how I've thought, frankly.
Yeah.
but I mean, that really was a transition that people started to make, wasn't it? From, people were thinking about records management and records as in the things that are,
Mm,
these are documents that they're not
Yeah.
documents, that they have their metadata, which makes them a record. And so they're stored in records. And people realizing that there's this whole other world of things that have a substantial and tangible impact on business performance. And so we want to manage that, which is information, which, I mean, I always come back to this problem that, well, find me anybody in information records or data management who isn't managing something that's recorded, and no one's managing the flashes that come off the ships. It's like, how do you manage
what?
things that aren't recorded? Well, you that's called a business process, or it's called, you
Yeah.
get a person to stand there and make a decision when something happens. That's kind of, it's a whole
Yeah,
other,
yeah.
but maybe it's been more serious in data governance because, I mean, the leverage that you can get out of data. I mean, you look at
Mm.
big organizations that have got these very large process systems to manage processes that have got, lots of regulatory requirements around them. I mean, quality at this end can make a big difference at this end. Whereas, I mean, documents still pass through a bit of a human filter. And I don't know if that makes governance less relevant, but, you don't need a machine to do something. And so I guess you can have more variation. So it's kind of a quality discussion, you know.
Well, yeah.
To
I
Judy.
mean, I still think that the need for good reporting really drives a lot of the data governance.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. And so I guess I was making my, pondering out loud about strategy versus operational governance. It's because I think that that idea of basically just um, monitoring and um, doing things about the quality of data so that you can report on it or information so that you can do something with it, to me seems very operational compared to almost that thing of like assessing
Oh,
what
right.
initiatives or what work needs to happen to get to, what are our priorities and where should we focus our effort, those kinds of things. Yeah, but I guess, I mean, what I would say is that I do think there is a benefit of paying attention to the quality of information right at that level of like, okay, the things that matter to us most at a really high level might be, for instance, regulatory compliance, or they might be, um, I don't know, access to information, or we might go Doug Laney on it, the ability to monetize our assets, like, acknowledging that we have information and then saying, what do we want to do? What are the important almost functions and capabilities of an organization, and like what's all the stuff we want to do with our information to um, improve how things are in our organization, and that's so far from a rebrand of records management, I guess is
yeah,
what I'm
it's
thinking.
so much
And
more. I agree.
I
Mm.
think I just
When it's done
I
well, when it's not just a rebrand. Sorry, Judy.
well, I was just going to
Yeah,
say
yeah.
I
I'm
feel
just saying, if you are asking those questions and trying to answer them, then that's nothing to do with. That's not nothing to do with records management, but records management might be one thing you agree you're focusing on.
Yeah.
Anyway,
No, I was just thinking, I really feel I need to say there is this big focus on Maori data governance at the
oh
moment in
yeah,
New Zealand, which is very much about who has responsibility guardianship of the data, and therefore who has access to it. What can you do with it? What can you not do with it? And that's has been a big
Yeah,
topic, which I don't feel qualified to say any more than that, but I just felt it needed to
Hmm.
be mentioned.
but I think there's something
Yeah,
in
good
that
call.
too, because I've always had this view that if you really care about a result, you measure it in some way. And it's actually interesting because I'm just thinking about how I think in some ways, records management, which is so driven by archival science, is probably incompatible with governance in some way. Because, there's this idea, you go and you go and sort of look at the big archiving traditions and, the kind of Jenkinsons and the Schellenberg, kind of ideas. And, you bump into these ideas that, one of them wanted to curate and the other one wanted to accumulate. And, it's
Hmm.
just this idea of, I almost feel like it's in both of those disciplines, there is very much a focus on the fact that, well, this stuff's already happened and records, you bump into terminology like what records fall out of a process,
Ah,
rather
yeah, yeah, yeah.
rather than this idea that I bang on about all the time and that I think, we should be focusing on, which is we need to look at the quality of outcome that we want and say, this is the quality of the information that will produce that outcome. And so we
Yes.
need to capture
Right,
the quality level of information. But that's sort of slightly off topic because I feel like that's very much we're just going to try and catch everything that comes out. Whereas this governance idea is this very much this thing that we're going to get in front of this thing and we care about it. And so we're going to measure that we are producing the outcome we care about. And if we aren't producing that, we're going to do something about it. And every time I see a kind of something governance effort, that's what I'm thinking about. It's someone really cares about this outcome. So they're going to specify it up front and they're going to manage it professionally. They're not
right,
just
I
going
see.
to let it happen. It's a kind of total, like if you think about archives as sort of standing back and waiting for things to happen and then trying to make sure they get them so that
Right,
you've got something that
yeah,
reflects what actually happened. I feel like governance is very much we need to say we need this thing to happen like this, and so we are going to make sure and measure and monitor to make sure. And it's interesting because
Hmm.
I think those ideas, and it's just what you've been saying that's triggered it for me. I think those ideas are somewhat incompatible.
Interesting. Yeah, yeah. I mean,
yeah,
well, it just really shows a really different point of focus, right? It's like that. It's that idea of okay, well, what of the information that is there do we want to do something with, versus like a broad view of information management or governance, both is what information do we need and what is the quality of that information in order to achieve a certain result, like in order to whatever that result is, rather than when we have a look at the information that is, then what will happen next with it, like which,
Mm.
it's a really different starting point.
That we keep coming back to, measuring and kind of controlling performance and monitoring it in some way. I mean, if you want to
Mm,
monitor performance, you've got to sit down and think about what you're going to measure. And then, how will you measure performance and how will you measure it over time? I mean, that's fundamentally kind of
yeah.
proposed in some ways, or just starting earlier.
Yeah, I think it's a good point that these things really flow from some kind of information strategy that would tell you what you should be doing and what you should be collecting and all of that stuff. And then you can measure against that, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I like that. And it also, I think, I mean, ultimately, you've got to be aiming at something. You've got to be aiming at something that your organisation cares enough about
Yeah,
and values enough
exactly.
to govern it.
yeah,
Because
and
governance is a senior thing, and if you can't get anybody, you can have a governance decision with a frontline manager, and they will have governance, conversations all the time. But if you are only able to talk about governance with frontline managers, I mean that's not even really. I guess that's the wrong analogy. It's really just governance is something that has to come down. It's
Mm,
we want it. We as an organisation want this objective and we want this thing, and we are prepared to invest, senior executive and management time in making sure we're going to hit that outcome and managing any variation, to the predictability of that outcome. So, I mean,
Yeah.
to establishing what those things your organization cares about that you can deliver are, and setting those as goals, I think, to start with.
I think that's absolutely right. And therefore, yeah, and so you decide what's important. Part of that should be your information management. Therefore, there should be an information strategy because your information is lifeblood. You've probably got a people strategy or something similar. You've probably got a financial strategy, technology strategy, I'm sure. Should be an information strategy which sets out what those goals are, what you value, and what needs to happen to it, and how the organisation should manage it, respond to it, deal with it going forward, and with some measurables in there, in my view.
And then for me, that bit about how does the information, oh, sorry, how does the organization take that forward? That's where you get that kind of really high level roles and responsibilities
Yeah,
around, well, who's driving that to me is where the kind of governance model would fall out of, is that kind of thing of like, okay, to achieve the strategy, you need these roles and
exactly.
responsibilities, these decision rights to go all the way back to Carl's point.
And
And
these
I
things
thought,
are all dependent.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
our business strategy depends on having the right people and the right technology and the right information, and the people depend on having the right information.
mm,
The information depends on having the right technology. So we need to manage all of these things like they're interdependent, because
exactly.
if people and tech are doing brilliantly but they don't have the information that they need, I mean, the business is not going to perform. So you've got to
mm,
manage interdependence like
Hmm.
it's meaningful.
Hmm.
Maybe that's the other piece of it. It's the interdependence, which is, I mean, the essence of strategy. Strategy is all about interdependence and management of it. So maybe that's it.
sure. Yeah. Yep. And
I like
perhaps to
that.
take us out just on a little real life thing is that where I've seen governance work really well, one of those connections to the really sort of enterprise, quote unquote, view of what's happening in an organization is enterprise risk frameworks, and having an enterprise risk that's something to do with basically not having the right information of the right quality available to the right people, etc.
Right.
And
Yes.
then that might trigger something like the strategy coming
Yeah.
out of it.
Good one.
And so getting that's the mechanism that I've seen in larger government agencies in New Zealand for actually getting governance as a real thing on the table related to information.
Mm.
Yeah.
So that was good, I thought. So thank you very much. And if anyone has experiences themselves of this and wants to share them, then please do sing out. We're always interested to hear from you. And otherwise, we will catch you anon. Cheers.
One, one
Bye
of
for
my
now.
one of my recent favorite sayings: "Never get so attached to one way of doing things that you wouldn't accept a better one." So, if somebody's got a better way of thinking about information governance,
Let's hear it.
Brilliant.
thank
Thank you.